In 1925, the skies over Paris cast a gloomy shadow across the city's most prominent landmark. The Eiffel Tower was nearly 40 years old, and the iron lattice was rusting away. Many locals actively hated it. Prominent writers had called it a barbaric bulk and a ghastly dream. To make matters worse, keeping the structure standing required 60 tons of paint every 7 years, an enormous expense bleeding the city's budget dry. This widespread disdain and the very real maintenance costs dominated local newspapers. Parisians wanted the eyesore gone, and the government clearly lacked the funds to manage it. This frustration created a massive blind spot, an environment where a highly improbable rumor could sound like a practical solution. When a city's residents actively root for the demolition of their own monuments, they stop asking critical questions. All that public resentment requires is an opportunistic grifter to channel it. Enter Count Victor Lustig. He possessed an aristocratic title, impeccable tailoring, and fluency in 5 languages. None of those traits were authentic. He was actually born to poor peasant parents in a grim stone house in rural Bohemia. Lustig built his aristocratic persona while working the transatlantic ocean liners before World War I. Trapped at sea with wealthy elites, he learned to mimic their manners and earn their trust, separating them from their money over card games and fake investments. He perfected his psychological tactics with a contraption called the Romanian money box. He would show a wealthy target a mahogany chest, insert a single $100 bill, and claim the machine needed 6 hours to print a perfect duplicate using a secret chemical process. In reality, a hidden compartment simply ejected a preloaded, genuine bill. The 6-hour wait time gave Lustig exactly enough runway to sell the box for thousands of dollars and vanish. When Lustig arrived in Paris and read about the city's struggle with the Eiffel Tower, he saw a familiar pattern. A towering monument made of thousands of tons of scrap metal was simply a scaled-up version of his wooden box, the ultimate target for a man who knew how to exploit human greed. Lustig began his preparation by commissioning a master forger to create highly official-looking stationery bearing the seal of the French government. He designated himself the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Using forged credentials, he sent letters to the 5 most prominent scrap metal dealers in Paris. He invited them to a confidential meeting at the prestigious Hôtel de Crillon, telling them the government needed to liquidate 7,300 tons of raw iron. He presented his pitch with total conviction. The government, he claimed, could no longer afford the repairs. The tower was coming down. The sale would go to the highest bidder, but absolute secrecy was paramount to prevent public outrage before the demolition began. As he spoke, Lustig studied the room. He wasn't looking for the wealthiest buyer. He was looking for the most vulnerable. He found André Poisson, an ambitious but anxious businessman who was new to the Parisian elite and desperate to prove his status. Professional swindlers know that a successful operation rarely depends on the quality of the forged paperwork. It hinges entirely on identifying a target whose personal insecurities will override their natural skepticism. Lustig invited Poisson to a private follow-up meeting to finalize the contract. But rather than eagerly pushing the sale, Lustig paused. He complained about his meager civil service salary and the high cost of living in Paris, quietly hinting that his final approval required a personal financial favor.
Asking for a bribe was Lustig's masterstroke. Poisson was naturally suspicious of the massive, secretive deal, but a corrupt, underpaid politician looking for a kickback? That was a familiar reality. The demand for a bribe paradoxically proved to Poisson that Lustig was a genuine government official. With his doubts completely erased, Poisson handed over a massive 70,000 francs. The payment covered the initial deposit for the Eiffel Tower, plus a hefty cash bonus directly into the deputy director's pocket. Minutes later, Lustig was out of the hotel. He boarded a train headed for Austria, a suitcase full of francs by his side, watching the French countryside roll by with a victorious smile. The heist was structurally flawless because it was self-sealing. When Poisson finally realized he had bought a useless piece of paper, he was far too humiliated by his own greed and gullibility to ever involve the police. The total silence from the authorities gave Lustig an overwhelming sense of invincibility. A few months later, he returned to Paris to run the exact same scam on a new group of scrap dealers. But this time, his target grew suspicious and alerted the police, forcing Lustig to abandon the con and flee across the Atlantic. Relocating to the United States, Lustig treated the massive American economy as an open playground. Throughout the late 1920s and into the Great Depression, he pulled dozens of cons across the country, selling fake property bonds and money boxes to anyone with a fat wallet. His confidence reached a level where he actively sought out the most dangerous man in America, Al Capone. Lustig convinced the mob boss to invest $50,000. 2 months later, he returned the exact same money, claiming the deal fell through. Stunned by this apparent honesty from a criminal, Capone gave Lustig a $5,000 reward, which was the actual goal all along.
Surviving impossible odds conditions a swindler to believe they can outsmart anyone. This constant escalation guarantees that a successful grifter will eventually test their luck against an opponent they cannot manipulate. Lustig's final mistake was transitioning from psychological cons into a massive, nationwide counterfeiting operation. He partnered with a chemist to flood the U.S. economy with millions in fake $100 bills. This drew the attention of the Secret Service, who finally tracked him down in 1935 after his jealous mistress betrayed his location. Even in custody at a New York federal detention center, he refused to stop performing. The day before his trial, he fashioned a rope out of bedsheets and swung out of a third-story window, pausing to pretend he was a window washer to calm the pedestrians below before sprinting away. As this report shows, his freedom lasted less than a month. Recaptured in Pittsburgh, the evidence of his counterfeiting ring was so overwhelming that he immediately pled guilty, and the judge handed down a 20-year sentence. Lustig served his time at Alcatraz, completely isolated from the wealthy marks he had spent his life manipulating. He died of pneumonia in a medical facility in 1947. On his death certificate, a clerk recorded his occupation simply as an apprentice salesman. Before his capture, Lustig penned a list of 10 commandments for his profession, emphasizing listening, patience, and avoiding arguments. His career proves that the most effective weapon in a heist is never a gun or a forged document. It is human insecurity and our desperate desire to believe a good story.